technology. Oh, no, don't start. Hello, this show does not provide medical advice. If you're having a medical emergency, please call 911. Anything you hear here should be discussed with your primary health care provider. Hello, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the radio show produced by Passionate World Talk Radio, whose goal is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. I'm Marianne Matzo, and for the next 30 minutes, I am your host. This show is for us to learn about serious illness, dying, death, bereavement, all of the topics that generally are not talked about in polite company, but are things that we really do need to talk about because we're all mortal. Today, our guest is Chris Sperry, and Chris has spent a lot of his time, the last 10 years, dealing with colon cancer, and now has stage 4 colon cancer with metastatic disease to his liver and his lungs. And he writes beautifully in a blog that he wrote about making the decision to elect to receive hospice care and not to continue with curative options. So I want to welcome you, Chris, and thank you so much for being on our show and sharing your insights with our audience, because many people face the decision of, do I elect hospice or not? And I think they will learn a lot from your experience.
Well, thanks, Marianne. Thanks for having me.
So about how long ago did you think about, or at what point did you begin to think about hospice? Is that something throughout the trajectory of your disease, or is that a more recent thought?
It's more recent. We had been given the diagnosis that the cancer had come back and spread initially to my liver 4 years ago, and then we're on a very aggressive treatment plan for that, and then found out that it had spread to my lungs and continued to be on a really aggressive treatment plan, all the while expecting, success. It wasn't until the fall that the various chemo regimens that I were on began to be less and less effective, and we kind of slipped down from plan A to plan B to plan C. So we knew we were on a trajectory that wasn't that wasn't as positive as we wanted. And then in December, when I had a regular scan, the results really kind of confirmed, hey, it really looks like the disease is beginning to advance. There aren't good options. There was a trial I could consider, but it was very, speculative at that point, not a great fit for me. And my oncologist, who I've had for 10 years, Dr. Blaise Polite at the University of Chicago, just a great guy, we've always had the kind of relationship, Carol and I, where we've said, level with us, and, we want information, and we want you to be direct, and even though it may be upsetting to hear, we want you to tell us. And he said in a very kind of gentle way, he said, if this was a point where you wanted to stop treatment, I wouldn't argue with you. And that was what really kind of started us down the path of thinking, okay, maybe it was time to now, think about a different game plan that was more about enjoying the time that we have left together, with our family and friends.
Did you, was it a decision that was yours alone, or did Carol have equal input? You have 3 kids. Were they involved in it, or was that something that you said, this is my life and I need to make this decision alone?
No, it was definitely, Carol and I spent a lot of time talking about it. I mean, I think it helped that all the way along this path, we've always been very, honest with each other, and kind of knew it's possible, we could be headed down this path someday, but always planned to not be. I've never gone into a scan or a CEA blood test. I've never not expected good results, and so we always, kind of talked about the possibility of things, going this way, but never planned for it. So we did talk about it. We tried to collect our thoughts, the two of us, and then it was unfortunately Christmas time with the family. So we waited, to kind of get through the Christmas holiday. And a few days after Christmas, while we were all together with the three of our kids and their significant others, and then we just talked through, this is what the doctor said, this is where we're at. We have not completely made the decision yet. We want to do just a little more research on this trial that might be available, and but it's doubtful that it's going to be a practical option for us. And so we are thinking that this is what's going to be the game plan. So we wanted to share the information with them after we had a chance to collect our thoughts, but before the decision was made, and we let them know that's where we were headed. And then we circled back after a few more weeks after we'd done a little more research, just to be comfortable that we were for sure picking the right path. And then we said this is what we've in fact decided to do, and this is how it's going to change. The biggest thing is going to be, I'm not going to be spending nearly as much time in the hospital, for treatment. And I part of my treatment was I have a hepatic arterial infusion pump that is like a titanium hockey puck inside of me that Sloan Kettering put in, and it requires maintenance even when it's not delivering chemotherapy. And it's every 3 weeks to go in and kind of like get your oil change basically with through your abdomen. And so that was nice not to be tied to that specialty procedure every 3 weeks. So we really, talked through it with them, and then we were all kind of rallied around the game plan of now it's about having good quality together.
How did your kids respond to your, that couple days after Christmas? If you're comfortable telling us, how did they respond?
Yeah, my kids are pretty stoic, so I think they probably, I know they talked a little bit more with Carol about it than with me, which I guess is probably not uncommon in a lot of families, that there's maybe one parent that kids open up to a little more, and probably easier, honestly, to talk to the person who's not ill, I suppose. But they were sad, of course. But I think they also had seen what life had been like the last 10 years, and that it had consumed a lot of time. So I don't think any of them felt like, oh my gosh, why would you give up? Why not? Can't you do something? I think they had seen that we had done all the things that were practical to do. So there was never a sense of second guessing from them, like, are you sure there's not something else? They knew that we had really pursued things aggressively. And then they pretty quickly rallied around, okay, let's enjoy our time together. And we over the last 6 months have spent a lot of really high quality time together while I've still been feeling relatively well. So they've handled it really well. I'm sure privately there are a lot of difficult moments, but we've been really proud of the way they've handled it and have had a lot of good time together since.
Well, and I think that also reflects on the upbringing that you and Carol gave them in terms of a sense of mortality. For some kids, they think about a parent dying, and that's the first time they've heard of it or thought about it. And Americans tend to look at death as an option that you can choose, and it's of course not an option. You can try to go with grace and on your own terms, but even sometimes that's not an option. So somewhere along the line, your kids must have learned that, death happens, and that it's particularly sad and very poignant when a parent dies, but that is part of the circle of life that it seems like in modern society we've lost touch with.
Yeah.
So what month did you go into, did you start with hospice?
Well, and this is I was never quite sure of really what the right timing was, other than just sort of, I guess, knowing that if I was going to stop treatment in January, curative treatment, then we were connected with a palliative care nurse at the University of Chicago who helped me through some symptoms I was still having from chemo. I was fairly, just coming off of about 60 rounds of chemo, and I had a lot of side effects from that. And so initially the palliative care nurse helped me, with neuropathy and just recovering from that. And it took, several months, but began to feel, better and better after that. And then the time frame we'd been given by the doctor back in December was, you likely will have 4 to 6 months of feeling good, and then 4 to 6 months of not feeling good. So that was kind of a start of the year, 8 to 12 month window. And so it wasn't until just the last month or so that we then now have connected with a hospice provider here locally and are having home hospice visits, and have been we have a hospice nurse who is coming regularly. We don't need a lot of ongoing care yet, but we're grateful to have set up the relationship with the provider and to be building a good relationship with our hospice nurse. And she has provided, I occasionally need oxygen, and she has adjusted some of the medications along with the doctor, which actually have produced a higher quality of life than I had before we started hospice. So I guess I'm one of those people who has learned, you think of starting hospice to die, and my initial, month on hospice has been, I feel better than I have felt in the last 6 months, which is kind of strange.
It's actually, really pretty common, because when symptoms are well managed and you're sleeping well and your pain is managed, you feel better. I mean, it's, not really rocket science, but sometimes it feels like it is, because you think to yourself, well, that hospice, that's that thing, everybody dies who goes to hospice, but, the purpose is, pain and symptom management and improving quality of life until the end of life. But most people don't think about, I'm going to feel better, and I'm going to have better quality of life. And it's great to hear you say that, Chris, because that happens a lot. I used to work as a hospice nurse, and I have student nurses who would go with me, and they, would expect it would be, almost a religious experience taking care of people who are receiving hospice care. And, they're like, what do you mean they're out shopping? What do you mean they need a different kind of wheelchair because they can't, get into the stores that they want to? And what do you mean they're planning a trip to Jamaica? And, there was one lady I saw a story about, she wanted to pick out new wallpaper for her kitchen, and we would sit and look at wallpaper books, and the students would be like, what the heck? What's going on here? And it's like, this is hospice. This is what it is. It has
been a pleasant surprise. Yeah.
Yeah. So now that you've kind of been in hospice for about a month, do you say to yourself, geez, I really probably should have done this a few months ago? Because there's a lot of really good benefits in terms of support and monetary, in terms of paying for your medication, and as you found, really excellent symptom management. Do you ever think to yourself, gee, I probably should have done this sooner?
I have thought about that. I think in some ways felt a little bit like, I don't feel, I'm still in that, 4 to 6 months of feeling relatively good, even though, as it turned out, in retrospect, I wasn't feeling as good as I could have been, but I felt like I'm still recovering from the chemo side effects. So I just kind of associated, I won't need hospice until I'm into the next phase that the doctor described, which is, and then you're going to have the 4 to 6 months of feeling bad. And so I felt a little like, don't start the hospice process until I'm sure I'm on the other side of that divide. And I probably took him too literal, in that, and kind of felt like I'll know when I've crossed over. And I know that's such a difficult thing for, doctors to be asked that kind of question. But yes, in retrospect, just given with really the changes that they made to the meds, the getting the oxygen now, of course, as you know, when you're not on hospice, and I started to feel like I think I do need oxygen periodically because I had not transitioned to hospice, the process to get that, to qualify it for it medically involved testing and insurance requirements that I just really wasn't willing to go through, particularly during the COVID times, where once I moved into hospice, the very next day the oxygen was delivered and I got immediate relief. So that was a great lesson.
And these are great lessons for our listeners, because people will put it off. And I've had so many patients where, I don't want to start that too soon. It's like, well, the insurance benefit of hospice is intended for the last 6 months of someone's life. But there is really no way to know if it's the last 6 months of our lives. And so if you start early and you get 7 months, 8 months, or 10 months, that's cool. We're happy to recertify that. Nobody throws you out of hospice. But in our country, the average is somewhere between 3 and 7 days that people spend in hospice that they could have had 6 months of support. And to a person, you go in and you do the admission and you get all the services there, and they're like, oh my God, why did I wait for this? And people wait, kind of out of two reasons. One, they're afraid that, hospice means they're going to die and they don't want to die. So if they don't go into hospice, they're not going to die, which, we know isn't true. The second barrier is that a physician has to, or, a healthcare practitioner has to write the order. And so what happens is the patient doesn't say to the physician, you know what, I think it's time for hospice. Can you write me an order? And the physician doesn't say to the patient, I think it might be time for hospice. If you want, I'll write you an order. So there's this sort of conspiracy of silence. The patient thinks, well, if the doctor thinks I'm ready for hospice, they'll mention it. And the healthcare practitioner, the physician, says, well, if they're interested in hospice, they'll ask me. And what ends up happening is nobody says anything. And so as a palliative care nurse practitioner, I would say to people, this would be a good time to think about hospice. And if you want, I can write you that prescription and you can have it. And whenever you're ready to call, you can. And sometimes just in the course of even that visit, they'll say, yeah, I think you're right. We, have the social worker come in, they choose a hospice, we get the script the next day or sometimes that afternoon. Hospice will go out and do the admission, and they're like, oh my God, why did I wait? And so a good lesson for the listeners is, well, why are you waiting? Don't wait for the physician to bring it up. You were lucky that your doc mentioned it to you. But if you think, the symptoms are getting, more severe for me to handle, the treatment is more of a burden than a benefit, then start to think about, like if you're on your second, third, or fourth round of a different chemotherapy agent, you really should think about how much of that do you want to do, what's the wear and tear it's doing on your body, is that something that you want to continue. So I like to look at it in terms of benefit versus burden. And when you're first starting out, probably 10 years ago, the benefit far outweighed the burden because you're a young guy. You're just starting out. It's like, like you said, you're optimistic. All right, I'm going to go in. I'm going to beat this. And not everything can be beaten. Some cancers are just real buggers. They don't want to stop, and we don't have all the stuff to make it stop. And so it can get to a point, 10 years is a long time, isn't it, Chris, to be doing that?
It is. And I think for me, we had always approached it with just our whole family with such a positive kind of attitude that we're going to beat this, that there was no gradual transition from, we're going to beat this to, oh no, we're not. It looks doubtful. We're pessimistic. We're sad. We're still in it, but it doesn't look like we're going to, be able to, to get a good outcome. For us, it was right until the moment where it became apparent that we couldn't beat it. We kept, fighting hard. And so for me, that was a hard transition to go from one day you're sitting, in the doctor's office talking about your scan, and your mindset is, okay, this isn't good, but okay, what's the next thing? What's the plan D chemotherapy that we're going to use? What's the next surgery? What's the next, should I do some radiation? And then to shift gears to, well, now maybe it's time to completely walk away from that mindset that you're going to beat this to you may not be. That was it wasn't a gradual, sort of a bend in the arc. Mm-hmm. It was a sharp, turn. And that was, for us, that was the right thing, because we either wanted to be kind of all in expecting success, or say, okay, we gave it our best. Now let's not, agonize over that anymore. And now it's a different plan. And now let's make this plan the best plan it can be. But it's different. Mm-hmm. And it's a sharp turn.
And there's different.
But I wouldn't have wanted
to. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, but I wouldn't have wanted to linger there for a long time. For us anyway. I mean, some people may have a different timetable, and they really want to process that and spend time slowly making that turn. And that I'm sure is a path for some people. But for us, it felt right to make that turn sharper. And I think partly because we'd always contemplated it could happen, but never really planned on it. No.
Right. You wrote in a blog about, I think it's called "Put the Seniors In" or "Let All the Seniors Play." I forget. I'm not too much of a sports person to remember the correct term. What's the title exactly?
Play All the Seniors, which essentially is putting all the seniors. Yeah, put all the seniors in at the end of the game, kind of, the people who may not always get to play. Yep.
Well, when I was reading your Facebook page, I think it was your brother-in-law wrote "losing gracefully," and I thought, well, my head goes to, he's not losing. He's changing his goals of care, and his focus is on quality of life and not on treatment, because I'm thinking like a palliative care nurse, and but I think losing gracefully, your brother-in-law is talking about something different that's related to your blog. So can you, for those people like me who don't really understand sports analogies, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I guess the mental image I sort of had in my mind is in a basketball game when the team you're rooting for and the team you love is behind, and the game is getting later in the game, and they're still behind, but everybody senses, hey, it's still winnable, and so you're rooting for them. You admire how hard they're playing. They're calling timeouts. They're pressing the other team. They're fouling to get the ball back. And you think, boy, it's the time's running out and the odds are getting longer, but they can still pull it out. And I really admire how hard they're fighting, and I'm enjoying and rooting for them, and I want them to win. But then, maybe it gets to the point where there's just a minute or two left, and they're down by 20 points, and it just kind of becomes apparent to everybody, this game is anymore, and at that point, two things can happen. The team can keep fouling and calling timeout, and the game can last, many, many more minutes and be, kind of, difficult and not a pleasant experience really to play in, honestly, and, not a pleasant experience to watch. But often the coach will recognize that moment, and they'll call one final timeout, and if they ever get to play, some of the seniors who are less talented, they'll put them in. And they'll say, this is, now your time, and you're going to get to play. We're not going to foul. We're not going to keep calling timeout. It's going to be a graceful end to a really good game. and it's going to be a better experience for the people who are playing the game, both teams, and it's going to be a better experience for the people who are here cheering for us. They're not going to feel like we gave up. We gave it a good fight, but they're also not going to feel like, my gosh, there's 7 seconds left and you're calling another timeout when you're down by 20 points. Why are you doing that? And so that was kind of what I had in my mind.
I think that's, now that you've explained it to me, I think that's a great analogy, because that really is what happens. And you can either, there's lots of ways to end the game, and there's not necessarily one way. And what works for one person isn't going to work for another. But I think part of it is acknowledging that the buzzer is going to go off, right?
Right.
It's not an indefinite thing. Nobody gets to play forever. No team gets to play forever. And so knowing that there has to be an end, then choosing, how are you going to manage that? And lots of people make lots of different choices. And it sounds like your choice in terms of electing to have hospice gives you the quality of life and the time with Carol and your kids and your friends and yourself that you want to have. How would you say?
Yeah, it was a decision. It was a decision for for me how I wanted to spend, but also for my family. And I guess the other thing that went through my mind a little bit was, if you make that decision to stop, no one wants to have, the going got tough and that person quit, kind of carved on their tombstone. Mm-hmm. No one wants to be a quitter, but I have been in situations before where someone has, finally, passed on after perhaps maybe, making a kind of a different decision. And sometimes people are, you hear the phrase a lot at their funeral, "Oh, it was such a blessing." And that's another thing that kind of weighed on me a little bit, is it's occurred to me before when I've heard that so of course some of that is, it is a blessing, but sometimes there's a note of, wow, that really was, tough brutal at the end. And I guess I felt like it's not maybe always a good thing to have, it was such a blessing, said so enthusiastically at your funeral, because I think people are kind of like, wow, that was exhausting for that person. What a tough way to go. So finally they're out of their, misery. And it was exhausting, honestly, for family and friends. And so that was another thing that I guess I kind of figured into the equation.
Well, and also having hospice changes that equation, because they're not going to let you suffer. They're going to manage your symptoms. And it's those people who are suffering. Sometimes I'll see posts on Facebook about, my mom or my dad's in terrible pain. What do I do? And I want to say, why are you asking Facebook? Get the right services in the house so that, hospice can come in and manage that. I feel bad for those people because they don't have to suffer, and the family doesn't have to watch them suffer. It's not necessary. How would you say Carol is doing, or what do you think Carol's thinking about at this process? You guys been married, 40-some years? And, it's hard to be the person who watches, as we've said, and it's hard to be the person who then has to get up the next day and keep going. Do you have any thoughts about what she's thinking?
Yeah, I think it's hard to speak completely for her, but she has been just such a great partner to me through this and through our whole lives together. I think she has so many things kind of going through her head. Many of them are, are around the practical things, like, well, what's life going to be like, by herself for for a time without me, with the kids being gone. So it's just the two of us who live together. And then, one of the things that didn't hit me for a long time was, when I think about this, kind of question, for me, it's a matter of, a relatively short period of time. At some point it kind of ends for me, and it's not something I don't have to think about anymore. She has that, and then she has, the rest of her life. So she has a much longer time horizon to think about things that includes a lot of things that won't be of concern to me because I'm gone. And so I think it took me a while to realize I kind of felt like we had sort of the same plate in a lot of ways, and I guess it took me a while to realize she has a ton of things on her plate that will become really, in her face and very meaningful after I pass away. And those are things that they're not really real for me. Not that I don't care about them, but I won't have to deal with them. She will. And I guess I just didn't think about how many questions and concerns she has that are longer and deeper and in many ways more difficult than the questions and concerns I have. And so that's been a big kind of learning for me, to think about the enormity of what's on her plate.
Yeah, it's grief is sort of the gift that keeps on giving, and that you never do get over it, and you never know when it's really going to hit you and affect you. And one of the good things with hospice is that they will provide bereavement support for your family for a year after your death, and so really encourage them to take advantage of that, because that's a great service. And some people like support groups, and like we have a podcast on grief, so there's lots of ways to get resources and kind of up that learning curve. Because I see people where I hear people say, well, it's been 10 days. When am I going to start feeling better? It's like,
right.
Oh, you've just started, and
yeah.
You're never going to get over it. And there's going to be things for the rest of your life that's going to trigger that. And it's kind of new information for people. They didn't know that, or they don't realize that. And it's you talk about managing expectations. It's like, let's manage those expectations, because you'll have good days, but you'll also, it's like a roller coaster. You feel good, and then that other hill comes, and you're going straight down toward the ground, and you're thinking, geez, can I get off this thing already? But no, there's another hill where you're going to feel better, and and so it goes. So my thoughts go to Carol, and really encourage her to use her resources, and because you feel good now, you can do things maybe to get birthday cards together, or something that will keep that place in her life, sort of keep that memory. I'm sure she's never going to lose the memory. It's not what I'm saying, but there are things that that you might think about, that you think, well, this will help ease that first Christmas, or that first birthday, or that first anniversary of where you're not there to share it with her and with the kids. You only have one kid that's married, so, and there's no grandbabies, so there's all those events that when they occur, they're going to say, I wish Dad were here. And so if there's a way that you can be there, if it's a video or a note or a letter, get one of your best friends to say, here's the stuff, and I want you to make sure that it gets to the kids at the right times.
Those are great ideas. Carol she's been good about helping me, assemble a little list of things, big events that we know, will come, and it will be nice for us to, feel like, we're able to in some way recognize them and celebrate them, together. And so we've done some of that, which is which is very comforting to me, and it really puts a smile on my face, kind of thinking like someone's wedding a few years down the road, to have a card kind of pop up with a thought,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oops, we lost him. Well, I don't know where Chris went, but he seemed to have popped out. So I want to thank Chris for spending time with me, and I want to thank you for staying with us during the show, Everyone Dies. You can read our blog and listen to other podcasts at everyonedies.org. Remember, you can listen to Passionate World Talk Radio on Spreaker and our shows wherever you listen to podcasts. Our thanks to Jeanne White, our producer, Lillian Caldwell, our CEO. I hope that you live your best life every day, and remember, every day is a gift. Thank you for listening.